Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. Today we're going to talk about red light cameras. And just to make sure I'm clear on this one, because sometimes people say, Steve, what side are you really on something? So just to make it clear here, in case you didn't catch the title, red light cameras are evil. Red light cameras are evil. And I have to tell you this, someone suggested I do a story on red light cameras. In fact, I've gotten quite a few requests for this over the years, but I never addressed them because we don't have them in Michigan. So I'm in one of the states where they are actually outlawed. They can't hire companies to install red light cameras. So in case you're curious, if you're in a state like mine that doesn't have red light cameras, or you've never heard of these things, what they do is they'll set up a system at an intersection that contains a bunch of things like a camera and a flash and detectors. And what they try to do is they try to automate this so that if a person runs a red light, it'll trigger the device to take a photograph of the car that is good enough to identify the car by the license plate. And then they will send you a thing in the mail saying, congratulations, you ran a red light, you now owe us money. And so I'm going to get into more details on this, but it's a very strange thing. But I remember hearing about these a long, long time ago. And in fact, there are also speed cameras where they'll set up a thing someplace and they'll get your pictures as you go by and they mail you a ticket for speeding. But I'm not talking about speed cameras. I'm simply talking about red light cameras. So Florida has them. A few other states do. In fact, let's see here. I looked up some basic statistics. There are 10 states that openly outlaw these cameras. They cannot do the red light thing in Michigan and at least 9 other states. There are about 19 states that actually don't have rules about it. They can have them, they don't have to have them, whatever. But in case you're curious, the last I checked, which is about 5 minutes ago, 24 states in America have red light cameras in use somewhere in the state, as well as Washington, D.C. and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And if you get dinged with a red light camera violation and you simply pay it, it can be as low as $50 in some cities to as high as $500 somewhere else. So, it's one of those things, like I said, in Michigan, don't need to worry about it. We don't have them here. But if I ever travel to another state that has them, got to be careful. And I've actually seen these things before. I spent some time in a state that had these cameras, and I remember seeing an intersection that actually had the signs up that said, red light photo enforcement, or I forgot what the exact language was. And I remember being near the intersection when one of those cameras went off, broad daylight, and it was like a flash of lightning. But they got to do that apparently get the good clear photograph from a distance. And so I've got to thank David Coughlin. I don't think he'll mind me saying his name. David sent me a note about this, and I said, one of the reasons I haven't talked about this is I don't know that much about them. And he said, oh, I can educate you. And so he sent me a bunch of information, a bunch of links, and he sent me a couple examples of what notice of violations look like in Florida. And then he sent me a link to a really good article written by a guy named Adam McLeod. And Adam McLeod is a law professor who got hit with a red light camera ticket, I believe in Alabama. And he wrote this great article, and it's called That Time I Turned a Routine Traffic Ticket into the Constitutional Trial of the Century. I'll put a link in the comments below. But he points out that laws that give municipal officials and their private contractors power to issue tickets via traffic cameras confer powers of both criminal and civil law while excusing them from the due process duties of both criminal and civil law. And what he's getting at is that the states don't set these cameras up on their own. There are companies out there that'll do that for you. And as you can imagine, they make money. These are for-profit companies. And they basically come in and they tell the cities or the states, look, let us do this. You're going to make a ton of money. And so as Mr. McLeod was inspired to do this article, it's because he, in fact, got a traffic camera ticket. And he said he got it in the mail. And so he said his story begins that he got a traffic camera ticket and an affidavit signed by a Montgomery City police officer that suggested that he had committed a traffic violation on a date and time and a location. And it showed a photograph of one of the vehicles that he says his family owns. And he was then charged with a civil violation of criminal law. And this is one of those confusing things that I've tried to explain this, but there really is no universal explanation that everyone will accept because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But many states say that traffic violations of a lesser nature are not crimes, they are civil infractions. And as the result, a civil infraction doesn't require all of the niceties that criminal charges require. So, for instance, you don't get a grand jury deciding whether or not you face charges, and believe it or not, you don't get a jury at all when you go to court. It's up to a judge to decide, and also the standard of proof is lower, at least in Michigan on traffic tickets that are civil infractions. So he got this ticket and an affidavit signed by a Montgomery City police officer that said that he'd violated the law. The problem was that he wasn't driving the car. At the time that the photograph was taken, he was at a faculty meeting at law school. So he decided to fight the ticket on principle, which, by the way, sounds like a lot of fun, but oftentimes includes more work than it's worth. On the appointed day, he went to court, sat down among a bunch of other people who were there that day, waited to be called, and then each appeared in front of the magistrate, and there the magistrate ruled against him. You lose. So he went to the front counter and said, I'd like to appeal that. And apparently they were confused because who appeals a traffic ticket? Well, here's the thing. There's appellate processes almost everywhere. And there was a way to do it, but they had never apparently seen it done before. So they said they had to, he had to post a bond, despite the fact it wasn't a crime. They wouldn't let him pay with a check because they don't accept checks. So he went out and he got cash after he found an ATM. When he came back, he said, oh no, we need more than that because the amount of your bond is like twice your fine or something like that. But anyways, they then, said, okay, we're going to set you up for an appeal. So he decided to call the city attorney to see if the city attorney really wanted to go through with this. And she said, of course, I do. Yeah, of course. And so he asked her some questions such as, is this a criminal action or a civil action? And she said, well, and this is a quote, it's hard to explain it in those terms. And he said, well, the reason I'm asking is, are we proceeding under criminal procedure rules or civil procedure rules? And there are, in the law books behind me in all 50 states, rules that you have to follow when you're in court. And the rules depend on whether it's a criminal procedure or a civil procedure. And he asked, and she said, man, it's kind of an interesting question. But she goes, but technically, it's a civil action. So I guess that works out. And then she told him that he had violated the rules of the road and explained, you were caught on camera speeding. And he asked her what evidence she had, and she said she doesn't need evidence because, he was caught speeding. And then he pointed out to her that he wasn't in the car. So the ticket was issued against the car, not against him personally. And she said, and again, this is not necessarily a statement of the law, but this is what he was told by a city attorney, that he is liable because he loaned his vehicle to someone who speeds. So at the time of trial, he moved to dismiss the case, and he said that the judge wasn't really that interested in that, so they decided to go to trial. And the city produced one witness, a police officer who had signed the affidavit. And on direct examination, he explained how the traffic camera system works. A corporation called American Traffic Solutions operates the camera system. And then when they get the photographs back, they choose which photographs they will decide to enforce. And they send those over to the Montgomery Police Department, who then initiates an action against the owner of the vehicle. And of course, they get a slice for their work. So on cross-examination, and yes, a law professor is cross-examining a police officer over a ticket. And on cross-examination, he establishes that the officer was not present at the time of the alleged violation. He has no photographic evidence of who the driver is. There were no witnesses, and he does not know where Adam McLeod was at the time of the alleged violation. Adam McLeod, of course, is the man cross-examining the police officer. And so then he asked the officer in summation, so you signed an affidavit under the pains and penalties of perjury alleging probable cause to believe that Adam McLeod committed a violation of traffic laws without any evidence that that was so. And he says that without hesitating, the police officer said yes. And as Mr. McLeod points it out, a police officer had just testified under oath that he'd perjured himself in service to a city government and a mysterious faraway corporation whose officers probably earn more money than his salary. The city rested its case. Mr. McLeod, or Professor McLeod, renewed his motion, and the judge granted it. And so the ticket was thrown out. And then he then goes on to point out that he had to jump through all kinds of hoops to try to get his money back because he posted a bond. And since the bond process was so unusual and so few people ever won these, that it was kind of confusing as to what, you won? We don't know what happens when you win. Nobody's won before. But he points out that, and these are very, very important issues, usually in bigger cases, but they matter in small cases too, that there are some fundamental things in our legal system, and one of them is that if you're accused of a crime, someone's got to stand up there and testify against you so you can face your accuser. And I've had people ask me, they say, Steve, who is the accuser in these cases? And the accuser is, in essence, the person who looked at the photograph and said, yeah, I think that shows him breaking the law. And it's a weird situation. But you know, I highly recommend you read the article by Mr. McLeod. It's a fabulously written article. It's a fun story. He's a professor of law at Faulkner University, Thomas Good Jones School of Law, and a lecturer in the Witherspoon Institute's graduate seminar on the moral foundations of law. But like I said, I was first pointed to this field and this topic to talk about by a gentleman from Florida named David Coughlin. And he had told me about struggles people in Florida were having with red light cameras. And same thing there. And he, like I said, sent me along a couple examples here. But here's the weird thing, and again, this is going to vary from state to state, although I suspect there'll be similarities in all of this. But what happens is a car goes through an intersection and a camera takes a photograph of the back of the car. So they have photographic evidence, presumably, that a car went through the intersection inappropriately, and we can identify the car based on the license plate. You can't identify the driver, though. And it doesn't make a lot of sense that we issue tickets to cars that are serious in nature. I mean, don't get me wrong, parking tickets obviously get assigned to cars and so on. But a moving violation, running a red light, that's a serious offense. And you know, in Michigan, it's you know, I believe it's a 3-point offense for disobeying a traffic control device. So it's a very serious thing. But what happens is, apparently, and this is in Florida, and again, state to state it'll vary. But what happens is they will kick this notice over to you. It'll come in the mail. And the first notice you get says on it, City of, and the name of the city, and it says Notice of Violation. And they send you this notice of violation, but it doesn't come from the city. It actually comes from what I understand, it comes to you from the people who are running the traffic control photographic thing, you know, in another state, in Arizona. Now, they do put the City of, and they list it, Intersection Safety Program, but it says P.O. Box, and it says Tempe, Arizona, and obviously Florida doesn't have any offices in Tempe, Arizona, except for the purposes of cashing in on these red light tickets. And it just says on it, you know, date, time, and a location. It gives an intersection. It says the name of the offender, the address, and so on. But again, the name of the offender is taken from the ticket, from the license plate. And so there's no indication that they know who was at the wheel of the car when it went through the red light. And then it just says at the bottom, it goes, statutory penalty of $158. And if you have questions about this notice, please go to, and they give you a website you can go to. And then a bunch of convenient payment options. You can pay with Visa or MasterCard, or you can send in a check or money order with the coupon below. And so then it says there again, name and the notice and all that stuff. But one of the things that's bothersome about this, not the least of which that there's no human accusing you or no human claiming they saw you do this, and beside the fact that they actually can't prove who's behind the wheel at the time of the violation, this notice gets sent to you a couple weeks later. Okay, so let's presume your car ran a red light in January. You might get this notice in February saying, oh, by the way, you ran a red light a few weeks ago. Okay? And I've heard varying stories about what the delay is between when the offense happened and when you get the notice of the alleged offense. But imagine that you're in a family that has several cars and several people drive those several cars, and then a red light ticket gets issued for an intersection near the house, okay? And it's for a Saturday. I mean, you couldn't even figure it out on your own who was driving the car that day a month ago, okay? Not necessarily. So think about this. They're going to accuse you of a crime and shake you down for $158, but like I said, some states it's up to $500. And you might not even know who did it. And if you don't know and you own the car, it seems even crazier. But of course, what happens is the first thing they send you is not a ticket in the sense of being a uniform traffic citation, a UTC. And a uniform traffic citation doesn't look like this document here. So what happens is, after you get this violation, if you choose not to pay that and you escalate it or whatever, they then do send you the Florida Uniform Traffic Citation. And it looks like a ticket on the left-hand side, and it has all this information on it, and it says that the fine amount is $262. Now, you might remember the original fine amount was $158. So if you want to fight this, it immediately, well, it doesn't double, but it goes up $110. And you now have the right to do any one of these things. You can make a payment. If you wanted to do that, you would have done that earlier. Or you can request a hearing, or you can sign an affidavit. And apparently Florida law has got a couple different exceptions for things where you might be able to weasel out of this, but I've heard that that's not exactly an easy thing to do. But you can set it for a hearing, and at the hearing you're going to lose. And the crazy thing about this is I've heard stories about people going to court on this in Florida and other states and fighting it on these arguments, going, there's no evidence that I was behind the wheel of the car. And they kind of take the position and go, yeah, it's your car. You know, you're responsible for your car. And I understand the idea you should have insurance on your car, so your car gets in an accident, you don't argue about who is driving. No, yeah, that makes complete sense to me. But to suggest that a car went through an intersection and we snapped a photograph of the license plate but not the driver, and we're going to issue you a traffic citation, which you will wind up paying, like I said, $158 originally, $262 otherwise. And then, of course, you can set it for a hearing where you're going to lose because it's a civil infraction and not a crime. So, like I said, in Florida in particular, there have been people who've taken these cases through the court system and up on appeal. And my understanding is that at one point in time, a couple courts had ruled that these were unconstitutional, I believe under the Florida Constitution, not the U.S. But unfortunately, I believe the current state of the law is that the Florida Supreme Court stepped in and said, as far as we can tell, it appears to be approved by the legislature, and therefore we're going to say this is good. So it's crazy, but it's one of the reasons that I tell you that red light cameras are evil. I think they violate a lot of things that we consider to be fundamental to our due process, one of which is the right to have a witness stand up in court and go, I accuse you of something, and I'll testify about it. And if you want to defend yourself, you got to defend yourself against these allegations that I'm going to make. And the second you say, oh no, it's a machine being run by people in Arizona, it kind of falls apart. So some states like Michigan have wisely outlawed them. And if you look at the groups that actually opposed bringing these to Michigan, it runs the gamut of the spectrum from the ACLU at one end to like police associations at the other end. And nobody wants these things except for the municipalities that are raking in the money by hitting people with red light camera tickets that are almost impossible to fight. So you ask me my opinion, red light cameras are evil. Questions or comments, as always, shoot them my way. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.